Now, today, we'll be looking at a unique topic, human rights in business. And the issue is advancing respect for human rights by businesses in Uganda. So we are all aware that as our country continues to develop, there are so many things happening. The volume of business is increasing. Some of these areas are completely new to us, including the extractive industry. And some of these projects being set up require access to land, workers, etc. But in there comes a challenge of abuse of human rights in different situations. So today, we'll be trying to look at what has been happening, but also understand the rationale behind promoting human rights in the business context. So I have three guests. Already two are here in the studio, and let me introduce them so that we can begin this discussion. Miss Maureen Kiza, a business and human rights expert from Enabel, which is the Belgium Development Agency. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us, Maureen.
Thank you.
Also in studio, Mr. Edwin Wanyama. He's the legal officer at SPESA. SPESA is Collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa. Good evening, Edwin, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right.
It's a pleasure.
All right. Let's begin with the context. Already I explained some of the few things to put this discussion in context, but I'd like to hear from you, and I'll begin with you, Maureen, the expert here in studio. You are the expert on human rights and business. What exactly are we looking at, and why is it important for us to actually be focusing on this particular aspect of advancing respect for human rights by businesses in Uganda?
Thank you so much. Good evening to our listeners. Yes, it is very important to look at such a topic at such a time, advancing respect for human rights by businesses in Uganda. Maybe by way of context, we shall come from the international perspective. Uganda is a party to the UN, and the UN in 2011 passed what we call the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights that set out what we call the respect, the protect, respect and remedy framework. So this framework gives an obligation to government to protect human rights, corporations or businesses to respect human rights, and if there are any violations, to provide access to remedy for persons that have suffered human rights violations in the context of businesses. So Uganda has since pledged during the 2016 Universal Periodic Review to actualize these principles by developing a national action plan on business and human rights. So in 2021, Uganda passed a national action plan on business and human rights that is coordinated by the Ministry of Gender. And so this project that we are calling Advancing Respect for Business and Human Rights is coming in to support government to implement this National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. And in the same arena, it also provides for the state responsibility to protect human rights, the corporate or business responsibility to respect human rights, and if there are any violations, to provide access to remedy for persons that have been affected or their rights have been affected in the context of businesses.
All right. When you look at Uganda, where we are now, what's the intersection between business and human rights? What have you been able to observe?
Okay. Thank you so much. From where I stand, we are coming in. I work with Enabel, and this is the Belgian Development Agency. So we are coming in to support government to protect, rather to implement this project that is funded by the European Union. So in our what is the intersection between human rights and businesses? So as I've already explained, this context where we are coming from, there is a legal framework, there is a policy framework, and now what is the intersection? We already know much as businesses provide, have a positive influence on development of the country, sometimes they also come with effects or underlying issues that affect people's human rights. And these are very broad. For example, large-scale businesses will come with a need for land. They need land as a factor of production, so they will come And as our constitution says, land belongs to Ugandans. So they will need to acquire the land for purposes of their business operations. So sometimes there are issues in terms of land acquisition, especially if it is large-scale land acquisition. For example, if it is a mining, let me say a mining business that is coming to do mining, they'll have to acquire land to be able to do their mining, to actualize their mining license. But also, businesses are employers. There are a number of people that are employed in business operations. And so there are quite a number of industrial relations, or what we call labor relations within this. And there are a broad spectrum of labor rights that workers that have. So the businesses also have to respect the labor rights of their workers. And this also goes on to respect their rights as workers, but also to, for example, the right to employment. There are quite a number of rights that come with leave, safety and protection of workers, the right to environment. Then later, also businesses in their products or in their operation may affect the environment. And yet we have the right to environment. So now that is a relationship that when businesses affect the environment, for example, if there are emissions that are coming from the operations, then there is an effect on the environment, which is the right to environment, right to a clean and healthy environment. So they will still have that relationship to the people, but also to the planet, which is the environment. So now this framework obliges businesses to respect human rights in such that they have to assess and see what are the risks to the human rights brought about by their operations, and then they try to prevent the human rights risks, and then they mitigate if they are likely to happen, they mitigate those risks, but also if they have actually happened, provide remedy to the persons that have been violated.
All right, let's hear from Mr. Edwin Wanyama. You come from CIPESA. In there, I see ICT policy. You know, I wonder what would be your interests in business and human rights.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to inform our listeners that the collaboration in international ICT policy for East and Southern Africa is part of the responses to the information gaps, especially as far as digital rights is concerned. And with this, we have tried as much as possible to delve into research and documentation, capacity building, policy analysis, partnership building and collaborations to ensure that we move together with the people. So CIPESA's interest, for example, in this space is built on the fact that we are moving from the traditionally understood aspects of business and human rights. As my colleague here has spoken, talking about industries and for example, pollution, the right to a clean and healthy environment, maybe labor rights and how employers behave. So we take it on from the perspective of the digital space. So how are rights of individuals, how are digital rights affected by businesses? And so we know that with the operation of the digital space, in where we expect the enjoyment of fundamental rights and freedoms, such as freedom of expression, access to information, assembly and association, as well as the right to privacy and data protection. These are some of the key rights that are affected by operation of businesses. So we have a corporate sector, which, for example, constitutes of telecommunication companies, internet service providers, including also internet intermediaries such as browsers like Google, social media platforms. These people not only employ people, but they also play a major role in content that flows. They play a major role in the flow of information. They can even dictate whether individuals actually enjoy their privacy in the online space or they don't. Sometimes they are required to make particular reports, maybe to states, and they may not inform the people on how much information they're actually disclosing. So most of these aspects or activities they engage in often end up infringing on the rights of individuals. Sometimes they have the capacity to curtail, limit, and censor free flow of information and freedom of expression, and as well as exposing individuals and therefore waiving their right to privacy, which goes to the root of expression and access to information and other digital related rights. Are
you able to explain this by giving us examples? Are there certain cases that you've seen that stand out that you can use to illustrate so that someone can understand what kind of violations you're talking about?
Yeah, so for example, I may, what usually happens is, for example, freedom of expression and privacy are key enablers of rights in the online spaces. But the Regulation of Interception of Communications Act establishes a monitoring center for communications and also imposes onerous obligations on, for example, telecommunication companies to install software and hardware that really enable real-time interception of communication, such that as and when some individuals, HRDs and actors are suspected to be either in possession of particular information that may fall within the ambits of what is categorized as posing a threat to national security, public morality, public order, maybe also terrorist activities, then it should be very easy for that information to be intercepted. So we have had quite a number of complaints and reports in the online spaces. For example, there are reports in the heat of campaigns that the phones of the NUP leader had been actually infected with malware, and information could actually be, their communication could be intercepted, and they had accused actually that Huawei was actually involved in that. But then also maybe the other practical example that affected every person in this country is that in 2011, during the general elections, we had a total blackout of the internet. So the internet was shut down. You could not communicate through any internet-enabled platform. You could not transact either using banking platforms or any other platform that depends on the internet. If you are actually studying, you would not actually study. So during that time, people didn't have access to information of what was going on, so they didn't know what was actually going on in the country because they had no access. So, but how did it come about? It came about because we have the cooperating in the tech sector. We have MTN, we have Airtel, and other internet service providers who provide the internet. And according to the UN guidelines on business and human rights that she has highlighted, they're supposed to take responsibilities to ensure that in doing their businesses, they actually do not infringe on the rights of the individuals. So the act of switching off the internet means that you have actually underlooked freedom of expression, access to information, assembly and association, because the moment you've turned off the internet, they're not going to enjoy this right. So that is one of the best examples of what transpired in the digital space when the internet was actually shut down.
All right, let me come to you, Maureen. You explained broadly the context, the intersection, but let's look at some examples. What have you been able to see during the course of implementing this project? I can see you've had trainings and so forth. We'll be coming to that, but we want to understand the salient issues. What have you seen? What kind of abuses are manifesting within the business sector?
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll give the context to the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights that highlights the situation analysis that informed some of the interventions or some of the strategies that are in there. So for example, it highlights issues of land acquisition, and how large-scale businesses in land acquisition, there are some issues that arise with the rights of vulnerables, the rights of women, the rights of vulnerable persons within the communities. So they also highlight pollution, environmental degradation and pollution. They highlight issues of child labor as the situation analysis that gives information, that gives the background to the formation of the NAP. Child labor, for example, in large-scale agriculture activities. For this particular project is going to consider farming sectors such as sugarcane growing. And one of the interventions that we are going to do is to contribute to the elimination of child labor within the sugarcane sector.
You know, there's a thin line between child labor and work. When you tell some parents that, look, what is happening here is child labor, they'll tell you the child has to learn to work. They have to contribute something.
Exactly.
And they will tell you in the African society, children work.
That is true. So that's why this project is coming with interventions such as sensitization. Our communities, including parents, our grassroots communities, should be able to understand through this intervention the difference between child labor and child work, or what we really sometimes we call it grooming, training. So any work, for example, that hinders the child's ability, the socio-economic and well-being of the child, then, or that limits or affects negatively their well-being, socially, if it affects their going to school, if it affects their health, then that is child labor. So our intervention through this project will support communities to actually understand what is child labor. And so we are going to work through a number of stakeholders, and including civil society organizations. So this particular intervention will be spearheaded by ISA, that will be in the communities of, maybe I'll go back to the context of where this project is going to be implemented, but to sensitize communities on what this is. So child labor is one of the issues that was highlighted in the context. There are other issues such as labor rights, the rights of workers, the protection of workers in terms of occupational health. All those are highlighted within the context to the NAP. So the project is coming, maybe if I may give that context, if you allow me. This project is coming in to support or to contribute to the reduction of human rights abuses within the business context. And we are going to work with both government and non-state actors. The first, we are going to work with government or institutions, state institutions that are responsible for the implementation of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, such as the Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, the Uganda Human Rights Commission, the Equal Opportunities Commission, and the local governments. Then secondly, we are also going to empower businesses, business entities and business enterprises, business member organizations in terms of sensitization for them to be able to understand. I think that's why you're talking about the trainings, to target them to understand what are these, what is business and human rights, and what is their responsibility. How can they uphold rights within their context, within their business activities. And the third leg, we shall work with civil societies where CPESA is, ISA and other two, RRA and ASEMP, to empower communities and increase advocacy on business and human rights issues.
All right. You hinted on land. What exactly is going on when it comes to land from a human rights perspective? You talked about how, is it about how land is being acquired? Is it an issue of compensation? What exactly is happening? Give us a picture.
So land, like I said, that sometimes businesses, and indeed they do, require land for large-scale investments in all sectors, even if it's agriculture. So what happens sometimes in the land acquisition processes, there are issues that arise. First of all, the people to know what are their rights, what are their obligations in this process, to have the prior informed consent for them to be able to give up their land for these development activities. But then also when it comes to the compensation itself, there are issues, and I know that stakeholders are aware of some of these issues. There are issues that are surrounding not necessarily the land ownership, but also the other interests in the land. For example, you may have a family, but this family has, let me say, a grandmother, the family has a widow, the family has a father, the family has children and grandchildren, and so you're taking their land as an extended family. And when it comes to compensating the landowner, so it becomes a difficult thing to decide who this landowner is and who are the other persons that are interested or have interest. For example, the interest of a spouse in a land acquisition process is very important. But yet, in some of our relationships, spouse may not be within the definition of the law. So some of those issues come in, issues that affect women that do not necessarily fall as to be a spouse within that process. But also issues of gender-based violence arise. You find when some people are compensated and they have the money, then they will go into relationships that may not be that may be viewed as gender-based violence to the persons that are really to the other members of that family. So there are a number of issues that arise in terms of that have been caused, for example, by lack of financial literacy. Yes, someone will acquire, they will be compensated, but whether they will use this compensation to actually have to restore their livelihood and live a fulfilling life thereafter, there are issues that have risen out of that.
All right, Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90. We are discussing human rights and business in the context of Uganda, looking at a project that is being implemented by different stakeholders with support from the European Union, being spearheaded by Enable, and it's called Advancing Respect for Human Rights by Businesses in Uganda. Now, let's look at this project. You have targets to meet, a number of issues that you want to do during these particular projects. Can you open up for us a little bit so that people can understand maybe who qualifies actually to take advantage of this particular project you're going to do, so that people can be prepared and partake of this opportunity?
Thank you so much. Yes, the project is being implemented in collaboration between the Enable and the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. So first of all, our target areas for this project are Kampala Metropolitan, Kampala itself, KCCA, Wakiso and Mukono.
Why those urban areas?
I'll come to it. And then we are in the Albertine, in the districts of Chikube, Hoima, Bulisa, Chiriandonga and Masindi.
That's
and
our
also,
oil.
Yes, and we are also in Busoga, in the districts of Iganga, Bugweri, Bugiri, and Mayuge.
That's sugarcane.
Yes. So we are targeting 3 thematic areas. First of all, labor rights, natural resource governance and land, and then we also target digital rights and internet governance. So in the agricultural sector, we are targeting the sugarcane and flower farms. That's why you have the Kampala metropolitan area, where we have a number of flower farms around here. And then, of course, we shall look there at the labor rights. We shall look at the rights of the workers. We shall support them in that regard. But also the Albertine, we have a number of sugarcane businesses, and also the oil and gas sector. So in terms of thematic, we are in the oil and gas and minerals. And then the Busoga area, we are targeting it also because of the sugarcane, but also because of the mining area that there are new minerals that have been found, and there is a company that has been given a mining license. So our intervention will be to support communities to know what are their rights, what are their obligations, and how best do they benefit from this mining operation. So what shall we do? Like I've already said, targeting 3 areas, targeting three kinds of stakeholders. The government, we are going to support build their capacity to implement the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. Their role is to communicate and coordinate. Their role is to monitor businesses, to regulate business operations, but also to provide access to remedy. That's why among the stakeholders I mentioned is the Uganda Human Rights Commission and the Equal Opportunities Commission that are given that responsibility to provide remedy. But also at the local government within these districts, at the local government level, we have offices like the Department of Community Services, wherein the labor officer belongs, and I have the responsibility to provide remedies in terms of industrial relations or labor relations. So for the second output area that targets businesses, so we shall target the businesses within these sectors, the mining sector, oil and gas, sugarcane, flower farming, but also generally our capacity building interventions will target the whole business sector. Because, for example, if I'm here, all other businesses, whether you're in this sector that we are targeting, you are able to know. And our approach will be through the business member organizations, but also particularly target specific businesses within their sectors, for purposes of capacity building, empowering them to do self-assessment, support them to comply or improve their operations to comply with business operations.
All right. Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90. We'll be returning to this discussion shortly after this break. We'll want to hear more from Edwin on the side of digital rights, because we know very well there have been issues here. The government has been saying people are violating the digital space as these modern digital spaces become open, people using mobile phones, and it's becoming easier for everyone to become a citizen journalist. How do we contend with that particular situation? Let's go for a break now. When we return, we'll open up this discussion, but also keep your comments coming via WhatsApp line, which is 0703 090 090. Spectrum continues after this break. Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum, live on Radio 1 FM 90. A topic of discussion today, advancing respect for human rights by businesses in Uganda. And I'm speaking to Ms. Maureen Kiza, business and human rights expert from Enable, the Belgian Development Agency, and Mr. Edwin Wanyama, legal officer at CIPESA, which is collaboration on international ICT policy for East and Southern Africa. Now, let's hear from you, Mr. Wanyama. You are talking about digital rights, and this particular project is going to be focusing on digital rights from your side as CIPESA. We are in a situation where the government seems to say that the digital space is being actually abused. Even recently, we heard from the Uganda Communication Commission, and they are warning people who are misusing the digital space. So while the digital space is good in its sense, but we seem not to have been prepared. We also have laws that we already know, including the Computer Misuse Act, which has been already used against some people. In that particular regard, how do you balance digital rights and also the issues that are being raised and the law that is actually biting from what we have seen?
Thank you very much. Quite a tricky question, but the truth is that, currently, the truth is that the digital space is what is ruling the world, and we're moving forward, and technology embrace and advancement is on the increase, and it will take over the world soon. So, but of course, when we look at the different rights and freedoms, yes, we are entitled, but quite often what usually dictates how we enjoy these rights is sometimes spelled out by the laws, as you mentioned. So the laws dictate a lot on the environment within which these rights are actually enjoyed. But also, as users of the different digital platforms and as people who are supposed to enjoy digital rights and freedoms, we also have various duties and obligations that we're supposed to comply with when enjoying these rights. So what has been happening today is that we have what we call the instigators, for example, of the different abuses of the digital civic space, and then we have perpetrators, those who take advantage of the different gaps or loopholes in the laws and the environment within which we operate to abuse rights of others. And of course, we have the regulators who also at some point double as controllers, who determine how individuals should actually enjoy. They may actually direct on how we enjoy the different rights and freedoms. So, but this is a call to different individuals that as we enjoy our rights and freedoms, there's some level of responsibility that we are supposed to portray, or that we are supposed to show that we're enjoying our rights and freedoms in the online space responsibly. Take, for example, what we call disinformation or misinformation, as well as false news. Disinformation is when someone shares information in the online spaces, knowing it either to be true and true, but they have the intent to cause some form of harm. For example, say hate speech. While on the other hand, misinformation, someone will circulate information without caring. The reckless circulation of information, not caring whether it causes harm or not. They do not really care about it, because they are not anywhere concerned. So this information has been used as a weapon, for example, for the enactment of laws that you're talking about that actually curtail on the space. So it brings what you call weaponization. Weaponization is when you take advantage of something to do another, which is counter to what should actually be the ideal of things. So this weaponization has been used to come up with laws that actually curtail the space, limit expression, as well as promote censorship in the online space. Because as you've mentioned, most of the laws always come up in the name of people misusing the space, so we are limiting how they use the space. Similarly, when you look at the Computer Misuse Act, especially the amendment of 2022, it came in at a time when some people were concerned, some politicians were concerned that there's a lot of sharing of information about them that wasn't going on well with them, because they felt it is highly intrusive even when it was actually not intrusive. So that brings us into the contrast between the controls and the established standards for the enjoyment of these rights and freedoms. For example, under the international laws or international human rights instruments, it is required that in the enjoyment of these rights, there shouldn't be wanton restrictions to the enjoyment of these rights and freedoms. Even then, it goes on to speak to the politicians and say, for example, they should expect a higher level of criticism in comparison to the ordinary people or to the ordinary citizens, because they have offered themselves for such positions. Nevertheless, these laws also provide for the extent to which these rights can actually be enjoyed. Our Article 43 of the Constitution provides for general limitations to fundamental human rights and freedoms, which includes most of these rights I've spoken about. And also the international instruments also prescribe certain limitations. So the rights are not absolute. That means they can be limited. However, again, the law sets parameters as to when these rights can actually be limited. For example, it requires that a law that there should be a law that provides for the limitation of the right. That is number one. And that secondly, that this limitation should be justifiable in a free and democratic society. And also it provides for proportionality test. How proportionate is the measure that you are actually prescribing? So regulation is not bad per se, but directives and control is bad. And where regulation should be implemented, then it should be done so within the parameters I've given you, that the law provides for something and that it is justifiable in a free and democratic society, and there is proportionality. For example, when the entire internet is shut down because of an election, because some people are going to engage in misinformation or disinformation, under internet governance, internet shutdown is an extreme measure which, for example, governments or states are discouraged from employing, because it is to the extremes and it does not meet the three-part test or the parameters I have actually spoken about. So it is something that calls for a balance. Users should use responsibly, but also regulators should regulate in a manner that is accountable and transparent, but not in a manner that literally goes into violating.
All right. Now,
rights
during the course of this project,
Yes.
what are you going to do when it comes to digital rights?
So, as CIPESA, we come in from a perspective that, first of all, we have institutions that we work with, just like she mentioned that under Ministry of Gender. So we work with institutions such as the Ministry of ICT, we work with NITA, we work with the Data Protection Office, we work with different institutions, especially that largely impact on the digital civic space. So, and as well as Parliament. So as part of our interventions, we aim to enhance institutional capacities on business and human rights. And when you talk about institutions, we're talking about government institutions and institutions of a private nature, some of which I highlighted, the telecommunication companies and internet service providers. But also, we come in from a perspective where we recognize the fact that there's lack of awareness on business and human rights amongst the people. And we recognize that there are different tools that can be used to promote awareness in business and human rights. So we shall move out to promote this awareness, such that while Enabel and other partners are coming in to see how communities can know this, we come in from an angle of saying these are the different platforms we can actually use. We can use, for example, talk shows like this one. We can use other digital platforms, maybe say podcasts, awareness raising through the online meetings and the like, to ensure that people are aware. But also, we are going to promote civil society advocacy, such as through dialogues and activities on business and human rights. Some of these we shall approach from an angle of policy analysis, like we have always done. Policy analysis, analyze the laws that we think are key and those that go to the root of the enjoyment of these rights, and then bring them into context and highlight the areas that need to be purged to ensure that they are in line. So this is, and then of course parliamentarians have been part of us. We usually do capacity building. We engage with them in trainings on how, for example, to do laws that reflect business and human rights based on commitments that Uganda has made at the international scene.
All right, we are going to bring in the listeners, but before we do that, Maureen, when you talk to the Minister of Gender, and it's unfortunate Commissioner Mujuni has not been able to join us during the course of this discussion, when you speak to the Minister of Gender, they will tell you that they are doing everything possible to ensure that businesses do respect human rights. They even talk about policies. They talk even about occupational hazard when it comes to issues of factories and things like that. But what do you think is the missing gap? We have all these policies in place, but we continue having this problem. Have you been able to make an analysis, and will this project try to respond and fix the gaps that you've identified?
Thank you so much. One of the things that we are going to do generally to the institutions that are responsible for implementing the NAP is capacity building. Yes, we have the policies, we have the laws, we have the guidelines, but they are supposed, the officials, the implementers of these laws are supposed to be empowered in terms of knowing exactly what they are supposed to do, but also tooling them. Our interventions are both at national level in terms of these agencies at the national level, but also at the local government level. Like I already highlighted, for example, the Department of Community Services within the local governments that we are going to work with, or any other local government, they are responsible for implementation of the NAP. Some of these responsibilities, for example, monitoring, they are supposed to, the NAP under Section 5.9 provides that they are supposed to pass bylaws to regulate the issues within their sectors, their institutions, their governance as local governments. They are supposed to sensitize, and yet they have not been capacitated to some extent. So this project is an opportunity for the government institutions or the implementers of policies and laws to actually implement, to actually do their role. So in terms of capacity building, but also provision of tools to do that role.
All right, Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 days now, bringing the views of the listeners. And if you're still out there, you have a contribution to this discussion, send us a message via the WhatsApp line, which is 0703 090 090. I'll begin with this comment from Twine Charles. Twine Charles writes in and says, good evening. I completely agree with the need to prioritize our human rights efforts. However, it appears to me we are spending so much time and energy on peripheral issues, while counterfeit goods are literally killing our people, destroying livelihoods and crippling our economy. Fake medicine, toxic products, and substandard goods are a clear and present danger to our right to life, health, and legitimate business. Where is the collective outrage? Where is the action? We need to come together and fight this existential threat. Our focus should be on protecting and most basic and fundamental human rights, not just the trendy or convenient ones. We need to have serious conversation about the real human rights issues that matter. Counterfeit goods are a silent killer. It's time we treat it as such. Big elephant in the house, so he says. Would you agree with him?
Yeah, I agree with. Thank you, listener, for this comment. I agree with you. Of course, there have been some efforts. We have a consumer protection law, though I do not think it has become so effective. And also, we have different strategies that exist. For example, I'll speak from a digital angle that exists to try and protect the consumer in the online spaces. For example, the Ministry of ICT, UCC has some guidelines on consumer protection in the online spaces, but also we do some work around, for example, online. To what extent is, for example, Google responsible for products that they will sell, maybe Amazon, and then of course we also have the ride hailing. We have the likes of SafeBorder, Bolt, and other operators that work in the online spaces. We've received at some point complaints and experiences that people actually order for food and then they deliver food which has actually gone bad, or products which are actually substandard. And now I think what
we also have fake phones on the market.
Yeah, and fake phones. All the things are around. And I think the biggest thing to do is that we need a competition commission like some other countries. When you read Kenya and Tanzania, they have these in place that try to protect consumers, especially in as far as some of these products are concerned, including these deceptive adverts that we see on media on a daily. I have seen some judgments or decisions by the tribunals in some of those countries, which we are yet to see here. But also similarly, as they have mentioned, the consumer uses their money to buy a product, but this product is actually substandard. They buy wires to do wiring in their house, and then it is a wire which is a time bomb that there will be a spark and there could be a big problem. So these are direct violations on the rights to property of the individuals. The people buy televisions which record them in their houses without their knowledge and actually send or share the images. These are all major concerns that we have to deal with. I entirely agree. Maybe my colleague, I don't know what she has to say.
Let's hear from Maria.
Yes, yeah. I do agree. And actually, in terms of human rights, it goes, the business or the corporate responsibility to respect, it goes beyond just the environment and their workers and the communities where they are working, but also to their products. To what extent is it that the products that the business is bringing on the market, or the manufacturer or the producer is bringing on the market, meets the standards, so that does not affect people's rights to, for example, yes, well articulated right to health. It goes back, the ripple effect is so great to the agriculture. This is an agricultural country, so people have complained. I remember in our entry meeting in Chikube, people were saying, what can you do about the fake pesticides, the fake medicines on the market? What can we do? And also maybe it comes back again, maybe to strengthen our implementation role. I know we have the Bureau of Standards here, and then we will, maybe perhaps we need to strengthen our monitoring and our regulatory role.
Dr. Howard Ayo Raisina says, are multinational business enterprises used as a weapon for neo-colonialism in Uganda? What percentage of digital revenues does the government of Uganda lose to tax leakages from evasion and avoidance? We have another comment coming in from Fred Benon Twinamasko, who says, good evening, Kenneth. This is, this comment comes from Mariko, who is listening in from Entebbe. He says, let's talk on the real issues suppressing the Ugandan on the so-called investors' factories, where our workers are paid peanuts and their rights are not respected, working in very dangerous, hazardous environment, and many have lost their lives without any compensation. Some have become lame but not compensated, and yet the investors are making a lot of money and are well connected. How shall we be helped? Another comment from Benon Fred Twinamasko. I will insist that Honorable, well, this is another comment. I think it was for another program. A comment from Yiga Samuel. I want to applaud the panelists for their efforts upon defending human rights, but they should remain impartial, more especially when defending the downtrodden while carrying out their duties. Then a question comes in to you, Maureen. Does this project include discussing the respect of tenants' rights by landlords? Somebody else writes in and said, for example, rights to privacy now that we have the threat of terrorism. Is a balance possible between advancing security and respecting reasonable boundaries? That's a question that comes in from Angela Asio. Well, let's respond to those very quickly and then wrap up this discussion. Maureen.
Thank you so much, our listeners, for the comments. Well received. Thank you for listening. A question whether the project covers the rights of tenants and landlords. So generally, I would say no. But from the, I would also say that from this learning, I hope we can be able to know, because a tenancy or real estate is also a business. But what extent is your business as a real estate agency, a real estate manager, landlord? To what extent is that business respecting the rights of people, including your tenants, your neighbors? So I would say generally yes, but specifically not, because we are covering those in the agricultural value chains, in the mining and oil and gas value chains, and those that are related digital and human rights.
Yeah, CIPESA has done some research on ride hailing. For example, what is the position of people who work in the virtual space? For example, Safe Border, Bolt, those who deliver food, deliver different products. Who do they work for? What rights do they have? Do they even have a contract of employment or not? So this is an area I think soon we will be trying as much as possible to engage into the deeper intricacies of understanding the position of such workers and how they can actually be integrated in protection under the Employment Act and other laws, though I know there are some efforts. And then, of course, in respect to the threat of terrorism, yes, terrorism is actually a major threat. We appreciate that fact. And of course, the main intent of terrorists is to instill fear in individuals, and governments have to come up to protect individuals. According to our Anti-Terrorism Act of 2002, as amended severally, again, the law provides for an act of terrorism and also provides for the right of the state or security agencies, for example, to intercept communication of people who are suspected to be engaged in acts of terrorism. That in itself is not bad. The challenge comes in when you look into the oversight mechanisms over how interception can actually be done, interception of that communication. So it requires that in the process of trying to protect citizens or national security, then there should be clear oversight mechanisms that actually buttressed and strong, such that they do not facilitate intrusion or excessive intrusion into the privacy of the individual. So there can be a balance, but all those efforts have to be in place. National security should never be used as an excuse to surveil or intercept individuals' communications unfairly. And so is public order, and so is public morality. Those, they should never be misused, but they should be used within clear oversight mechanisms, such as court orders, maybe orders of those that have been prescribed in the laws before something is done.
Maureen? As we come to the end of this show, let's wrap up the key issues. If you can remind our listeners what this project is about and how they can actually be part of it.
Thank you so much, our dear listeners. This project targets government institutions mandated to implement the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights in the implementing districts in the regions that I've mentioned. And so we shall be expecting to work with you in terms of capacity building and tooling. The project works with business entities in the value chains of agriculture, in the value chains of mining and oil and gas, but also we expect to work with a number of business member organizations for purposes of capacity building, awareness raising, but also we are working with civil society organizations that will reach our grassroots communities with empowerment messages to know your rights and be able to participate, defend for your rights, but also seek remedy, seek redress, seek help where there is a violation. Thank you.
Let's hear from Edwin as we come to the end
Yeah,
of the
thank
show.
you very much. Our dear listeners, I think as part of my parting talks is that how we can be engaged, and some of you will be reached, especially in Busoga region, as well as the Albertine, the oil Grabeno Albertine region. But partly we have to increase on awareness raising and sensitization, and also we believe we will have to engage effective monitoring and reporting of violations is very key, especially for reporting to international mechanisms such as the Universal Periodic Review, which was highlighted much earlier. Public and private sector policy engagement and dialogue on responsibilities in the digital sector is very key, but as well as building synergies with government, private sector, CSOs, and other players, including academia, the legal fraternity, are very key areas to engage in this project.
All right, I must thank you, dear guests, for actually sparing time to come and explain to the listeners about this project. I hope when you begin implementing, you will be able to come back and give us the feedback and tell us how far we have gone, or do even an analysis after maybe a certain period to see whether the project has created an impact. Thank you very much, dear listeners, for tuning in and sharing your views. Tomorrow, same time, we'll be doing 2 hours of analysis of the top events of the week through Spectrum Extra. Make a date with me then. But from me and the team here in studio, we wish you a good night. But stay tuned to Radio 1. Up next, we have the news in English. Thereafter, we'll have